The rancher tasted the stew, then demanded to meet the woman who made it. The bowl hit the counter with a sound that was harder than Colt intended. He stood there, one hand still gripping the edge of the sink, the other pressed flat against the worn wooden surface of the counter, and he did not move. The smell of whatever had been in that bowl was still in the air around him, warm and deep and layered with something he could not name but felt all the way down in some part of him that had been quiet for a very long time. His throat worked. He swallowed. He looked at the empty bowl like it owed him an explanation. Outside, the Texas sky had gone the color of old brass, and the last light was spreading flat and wide across the Red River Valley, the way it always did in August. Slow and heavy, and indifferent to everything below it. The cattle had been fed. The water troughs were full. The fencing along the east pasture had held through the afternoon wind. Everything was as it should be. Everything was in order. Everything except this feeling sitting in the middle of his chest that he did not have a name for, and had not expected, and did not, frankly, know what to do with. Colt Reardon was 43 years old. He had been running the family ranch alone for 11 years, since his father passed and left him the land, the debt, the herd, and a piece of advice scrawled on the back of a feed receipt that said simply, "Keep going." He had kept going. He was good at that. He was less good at things that required him to stop and feel something he hadn't scheduled. He ate the same meals most evenings. Darnell, his ranch hand, left something on the stove when he remembered to. And when he didn't, Colt opened a can of something and ate it standing at the counter, because sitting down at the table alone felt like more ceremony than the moment deserved. He had long since stopped noticing the difference between a good meal and a necessary one. Food was fuel. The body needed fuel. That was the entire relationship. He had eaten that way for years. He had eaten that way tonight, or he had intended to, right up until the moment he lifted the spoon. He was not a man given to dramatic reactions. His ranch hands would have said he was the least dramatic person they had ever worked for, which they meant as a compliment. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't celebrate good news out loud. He absorbed things. He processed them quietly and moved forward. That was simply his nature. Or it had become his nature over the years of living in a house that had no one else in it. But he set that bowl down with more force than he meant to, and he stood very still, and something in him was moving in a direction it hadn't moved in a long time. His sister Vera had arrived 3 days ago. This was the sort of thing she did. She had a husband, Dale, who attended various agricultural conferences throughout the year, and when Dale was away, Vera came to stay at the ranch because she said it was better than rattling around their house in Fort Worth alone. Colt suspected it was also because she liked to keep an eye on him, though she was polite enough not to say so directly. She was 4 years older than him and had appointed herself his general supervisor in matters she considered important, which included most matters. She had brought a woman with her this time. Celeste Fontenot was her neighbor back in Fort Worth. That was what Vera had said when she called ahead. Just the bare facts. A neighbor. A widow. She was coming along for the drive and needed somewhere to be for a week. Colt had said that was fine. He had space. He had 2 spare rooms. He was not a man who turned away guests, especially guests who arrived with his sister and required nothing from him except a bed and a plate at the table. He had met Celeste at the front door when they arrived on Sunday afternoon. She was a tall woman, not thin but not heavy either, with gray beginning at her temples and a way of standing that suggested she had made peace with taking up the space she occupied. She wore no makeup that he could see. Her eyes were dark brown and calm. She shook his hand with a firm grip, said it was very kind of him to have her, and looked around at the land with the quiet attention of someone who was genuinely interested in what they were seeing. He had said something about the house, showed her to her room, and then excused himself to go check the water trough in the east pasture, because it genuinely needed checking, and also because he was not entirely sure what to do with a woman he had just met, who was standing in his hallway looking at his walls. He had not thought much about her in the 3 days since. That was a lie, but it was the kind of lie a man tells himself in the interest of keeping things orderly. He had noticed certain things, not because he was looking, but because he could not help it. He noticed that she was quiet, in a way that did not seem like shyness. She was comfortable with silence, in a way that most people were not. She sat on the porch in the evenings with a glass of tea and watched the light change across the pasture, and she did not seem to need to fill the silence with conversation. He respected that. He himself had no patience for people who talked simply to avoid quiet. He noticed that she laughed at things Vera said in a way that was genuine and low and not performed. He noticed that she asked Darnell questions about the cattle on the second morning and listened to his answers with real attention, and that Darnell, who was 57 years old and deeply suspicious of anyone he didn't already know, had looked at her afterward with an expression of moderate approval, which was the highest praise Darnell gave. He noticed all of this the way a man notices things he is not looking for. From the side. Briefly. And then looks away. What he had not noticed, or had not let himself fully register, was that she had gone into his kitchen at 2 in the afternoon on Wednesday, and had not come out until 6, and that whatever she had been doing in there had slowly transformed the entire atmosphere of the house. He had come in from the afternoon work at 7:15. The smell reached him at the back door. It stopped him the way a physical thing stops you. Not dramatically, not with any great theater. It simply reached into some place behind his sternum and put a hand on something and held it. He had walked to the stove. He had ladled himself a bowl without even thinking about it, which in itself was unusual, because he was a man who thought about most things before he did them. He sat down at the table. He ate. He did not understand what was happening to him as he ate. It was a bean stew, he could tell that much. Ham, Bayou dark broth, what tasted like cayenne somewhere underneath, and black pepper on top, and something sweet deep in the base of it that he couldn't isolate no matter how carefully he paid attention. It was not complicated food. He knew that. He could see the components. But the way they had come together, the patience that had clearly gone into the layering, the way the flavors had been given actual time to find each other rather than being rushed, produced something that was so far beyond the sum of its parts that it seemed almost like a different thing entirely. He ate the whole bowl. He sat with the empty bowl for a moment. He went back to the pot and served himself again, which he had not done at dinner in more years than he could count. He ate the second bowl more slowly. He was not eating now because he was hungry. He was eating because he was trying to understand something. He put the second bowl in the sink. He stood at the counter, and then he walked down the hall and found Vera sitting in the living room with her reading glasses on, and a magazine open in her lap. He stood in the doorway. "Who made that?" he said. Vera looked up at him over the top of her glasses. She took her time. She could tell something was different, the way sisters can tell things that they keep to themselves and file away for later. "Celeste," she said. She asked if she could use the kitchen. "I told her you wouldn't mind." Colt stood there for a moment. "I didn't mind," he said. He went back to the kitchen. He stood at the counter again and looked at the pot. He thought about the woman he had shaken hands with on Sunday, who stood quietly in his hallway and asked Darnell intelligent questions about cattle, and watched the light on the pasture in the evenings, without needing to say anything about it. He thought about the fact that he had eaten 2 full bowls of supper and still felt something that was not satisfaction exactly. Felt more like attention, like being awake to something. He picked up his bowl from the sink and rinsed it. He dried it and set it on the rack. He did all of this carefully and deliberately, the way he did everything. Then he went and stood at the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking into the dim hall, and he thought about the woman who had made that stew and gone somewhere while he ate it. And he thought about the fact that he did not know where she was in his house right now, or what she was doing, or whether she knew what she had done to his entire evening. He thought about all of this for a long moment. Then he went to find her. He told himself he was going to say thank you. He was going to say thank you. That was all. That was a reasonable thing to do. A person made food in your kitchen and you thanked them. That was ordinary human behavior. He walked down the hall. He checked the porch. She was not on the porch. He checked the back sitting room. She was not there. He found her eventually in the spare room at the end of the hall with the door open, sitting at the small desk near the window, writing something in a notebook by the lamp's light. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. "I wanted to say thank you," he said, "for supper." She looked at him steadily. That calm, measuring look. "You're welcome," she said. He stood there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "It was very good," he said. "I'm glad," she said. She held his gaze. She did not look uncomfortable. She did not look particularly surprised. She looked like a woman who was waiting to see if he had more to say. He didn't. He said good night and went back to his room and lay down on top of the covers with his boots still on and stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the sound of the ranch settling around him in the dark, and tried to figure out what, exactly, had just happened to him. He couldn't quite place it. But it felt, in some quiet and bewildering way, like the beginning of something. And Colt Reardon was a man who took beginnings seriously. She had not planned to cook. Celeste Fontenot was many things, and a woman who pushed herself where she was not wanted was not one of them. She had come to this ranch because Vera asked her to come, and because the truth of the matter was that she had nowhere else particular to be, and she had thought that a week in the Texas countryside would at least be different from a week alone in a house in Fort Worth, that still held the particular silence of a place where someone used to live, and no longer did. That silence had been her companion for 2 years. She had grown accustomed to it. She had learned how to fill her days so that the silence did not have too much room to grow. She cooked. She gardened. She visited her sister in Baton Rouge twice a year. She went to church on Sunday mornings, and volunteered at the food pantry on Wednesdays, and kept herself busy with the steady, purposeful rhythm of a woman who has understood that grief does not end, but it does change, and that the work of living through it is mostly just the work of not stopping. She had been watching Colt Reardon for 3 days, not in any deliberate way. She was simply attentive, and he was difficult not to pay attention to. He moved through his property the way a man moves through something he understands completely, with an ease that came not from arrogance but from long knowledge. She could see him from the porch in the mornings, working the fence line in the east or speaking with Darnell near the barn, and there was a quiet authority in the way he carried himself that she found herself watching longer than she expected. He was not a showy man. He didn't need to be. He simply knew what needed doing and did it. He was also, she had observed, profoundly alone. Not lonely, or not visibly so, but alone in the way that a person becomes alone when they've arranged their entire life so that the loneliness has no sharp edges left to cut them. Everything was organized. Everything was efficient. The house was clean but not lived in, exactly. There were no photographs on the walls of the living room. The kitchen held exactly the utensils needed and nothing decorative. The shelves had practical books about land management and cattle husbandry and weather patterns, and a few novels that looked as though they hadn't been touched in a long while. She thought about all of this on Wednesday morning as she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, while Vera was on the phone with Dale. She thought about the man who lived in this house and fed himself from cans and whatever his ranch hand left on the stove, and she thought about the kitchen itself, which had a wide iron pot on the bottom shelf of the pantry, and a good stove and light that came through the window at an angle that reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen in Opelousas. She found the ham hock in the back of the freezer wrapped in paper with no date written on it, which told her it had been there a while. She found dried navy beans in a tin that had been pushed to the back of the highest shelf. She found an onion, 3 cloves of garlic, a fading stalk of celery, and a bell pepper that was soft but still good. She found cayenne pepper and black pepper and dried thyme, and a bay leaf that had gone brittle but would still do its work. She found a bottle of Worcestershire sauce, and a small can of tomatoes and a piece of smoked sausage in the cold drawer that she hadn't expected. She stood at the counter and looked at all of it. Then she went and asked Vera if she thought Colt would mind if she used the kitchen for the afternoon. Vera looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "He won't mind," Vera said. Celeste went back to the kitchen and started. She soaked the beans first, which Vera had already put in water the night before out of habit, the way women from certain places do automatically without being asked. She trimmed the fat from the ham hock and put it in the pot with cold water and brought it to a low simmer. While it worked, she diced the onion and the celery and the bell pepper with the steady, practiced efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times and finds comfort in the repetition of the motion. She cooked them down in a little oil until they were soft and sweet and translucent, and then she added the garlic and let that go for another minute until the kitchen began to smell the way a kitchen should smell when someone who knows what they are doing is working in it. She built the stew layer by layer. She added the tomatoes. She added the seasoning. She added the beans when they were ready, and the broth from the ham hock, and then the meat, pulled from the bone in pieces. She added the smoked sausage in rounds. She tasted it, and added more black pepper, and a generous hand of cayenne, because she came from Louisiana, and she cooked like it. Then she turned the heat down to the lowest setting and left it. That was the part that most people skipped. The leaving. The patience of letting things find each other over hours without interference. Her mother had told her once that a stew rushed is a stew ruined, and that was the most important cooking lesson she had ever received. You put the thing together with care, and then you trusted it. You walked away. You let time do the work that no amount of stirring could do for you. She went and sat on the back porch with her notebook and wrote a letter to her sister that she probably wouldn't send because she never sent letters. She just liked writing them. The afternoon moved around her, the Texas heat a different weight than Louisiana heat, drier and more direct. A hawk turned slow circles over the far pasture. Darnell drove the truck along the fence line in the distance, a cloud of pale dust following him. She wrote about the ranch and its quietness, and the way the land out here felt different from home, wider and more exposed, as if the sky out here had decided it wanted more room than the sky over Louisiana allowed. She wrote about Vera's brother without quite meaning to, a paragraph about his hands and the way he looked at the land when he checked things, and then she went back and read what she'd written and closed the notebook. She went inside and tasted the stew again at 4 o'clock. She adjusted the seasoning. She added a little more thyme. She tasted it again at 5:30. It was ready, but she let it go another half hour, because she knew that the difference between ready and done was 30 minutes on a low flame. At 6 o'clock, she turned off the heat, and set the pot on the back of the stove, and covered it with a lid, and went to wash her hands. She didn't think much about what was going to happen when he ate it. She wasn't cooking for him. She was cooking because she was a guest in a house that held a kitchen, and because cooking was the way she occupied her hands and ordered her thoughts and made herself feel useful. She cooked the way other people prayed. It was the same posture inside of her. Attention, patience, gratitude for the act itself, separate from what came of it. She was at the desk in her room when she heard him come in. She heard the back door. She heard the sound of boots on the kitchen floor. She heard the particular stillness of a house when someone inside it has stopped moving. She kept writing. She heard the sound of the ladle in the pot, which she had not expected. She had assumed he would notice the pot, perhaps warm it when he was ready, perhaps not. She had not thought about whether he would eat it immediately, or wait for her and Vera to sit down. The house was quiet for a long stretch. Then she heard the sound again, the ladle, the pot. A second bowl. She put her pen down. She sat with that for a moment. The image of him standing at the pot in his kitchen, in the last of the August light, eating a second bowl of something she had made. Something about that image reached into her in a way she was not expecting. She did not examine it closely. She had learned, in the years since her husband Raymond passed, to let feelings arrive without immediately needing to understand them. They came. They moved through. That was all. She went back to writing. She heard his footsteps in the hall. Slow, deliberate. Stopping outside Vera's room, a murmur of conversation. Then the footsteps again, closer, toward the kitchen. She heard the sink, the running water, the quiet of things being put away with care. And then footsteps coming down the hall toward the rooms. She kept her head down over her notebook. The door was open. She heard him stop. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway. He was still in his work clothes, worn denim and a flannel shirt, with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. And he had the look of a man who has walked in with one intention and is now not entirely sure it covers the full situation. "I wanted to say thank you," he said, "for supper." "You're welcome," she said. She kept her eyes on him, curious about what he would do next. He was a man who held himself very still when he was uncertain about something. She could see that now. He didn't fidget. He didn't look away. He simply went still and waited, as if he were deciding something. "It was very good," he said. "I'm glad," she said. He stood there a moment longer. She waited. She had nowhere to be. He said goodnight and left. She sat for a while after she heard his door close at the end of the hall. She sat with the lamplight, and the warm smell that was still faintly in the house, and the sound of the ranch outside in the August dark, crickets, and the occasional low sound from the cattle in the near pasture. She thought about Raymond, not with grief exactly, more with the quiet tenderness that had replaced grief over the 2 years since she lost him. Raymond had been a man who said very little, and meant everything he said, and she had loved him for 31 years with a deep and uncomplicated love that had asked nothing theatrical of either of them. She missed him the way she would miss a limb, not with constant pain but with a constant awareness of absence, a reaching for something that was no longer there. She had not thought about another man in any particular way since Raymond. She had not expected to. She was 51 years old and she had a full life, and she was not a woman who required romantic feeling to feel complete. She had been complete. She had arranged herself around completeness very deliberately. But she sat there with the lamp on, and the ranch sounds outside, and something in the air of the house that was different now from 3 days ago, and she thought about the man who had stood in her doorway with more feeling in his face than he probably knew was there, and she thought about the fact that he had gone back for a second bowl. She had not cooked for a man since Raymond. Not in that way. Not with the intention of making something that would feed more than just a body. She wasn't sure she had intended it this time either. But she sat with the possibility of it, quiet and open, the way she sat with most things she didn't understand yet. She didn't push it. She didn't dismiss it. Outside, the Texas night settled over the valley like a held breath, and the stars came out one by one over the dark flat land. And somewhere in the east pasture, a cow moved through the grass, and the whole night was still and warm and waiting. She closed her notebook. She turned off the lamp. She lay in the dark of the spare room in Colt Reardon's ranch house and listened to the silence of the building around her, so different from the silence of her house in Fort Worth, less empty, somehow, than she had expected a stranger's house to be. In the morning there would be breakfast, and then another day, and then another, and she was in no hurry. She was good at patience. She had always been good at patience. The stew had been proof of that. And so, she thought, as she drifted toward sleep, was she. The Thursday morning arrived the way August mornings do in the valley, with sudden heat, and a sky that had already decided it wasn't interested in clouds. Colt was up at 5:15, which was when he always woke, his body trained to the rhythm of the ranch with a reliability that no alarm clock had ever matched. He dressed in the dark. He put on his boots. He went to the kitchen and made coffee. She was already there. He stopped in the kitchen doorway for a brief moment, that he covered by moving immediately to the cabinet where the mugs lived. She was sitting at the table with her own coffee and her notebook open in front of her, a pen resting in her hand, and she looked up when he came in, with an expression of mild, easy calm, as if finding the owner of the house in his own kitchen at 5:15 in the morning was an entirely unremarkable event. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he said. He poured his coffee. He leaned against the counter. He looked out the window at the dark that was just beginning to shift toward gray at the far edge of the property. She wrote something in her notebook. He drank his coffee. The house was quiet around them. It was not, he noticed, an uncomfortable quiet. He was particular about this. He had spent time with people whose silences felt like questions, like pressure, like a kind of waiting that demanded you fill it with something. Her silence was not like that. Her silence was simply her being where she was, occupied with her own thoughts, requiring nothing from him. He found that he did not want to leave the kitchen the way he usually did, heading straight for the barn as soon as his coffee was half finished. He stood at the counter and drank his coffee, and looked out the window and was, in some quiet way, comfortable. "What do you write?" he asked. She looked up, no surprise in her face at the question. Letters mostly, she said. I don't send them. I just find it useful to write things down. He thought about that. What kind of things? Whatever's in my head at a given moment, she said. It's how I think. He nodded. He understood that. He kept a record book of ranch decisions, things he had tried and what had happened, problems and their solutions. It was not letters, but it was the same impulse. The need to put a thing outside of yourself so you could look at it clearly. Does it help? He asked. Usually, she said. He finished his coffee. He put the mug in the sink. I'll be in the east pasture until about noon, he said. He didn't know why he said it. She hadn't asked. All right, she said, not with any particular meaning, just acknowledging that she'd heard him. He went out to the barn. He thought about her for most of the morning in the intervals between work, which were brief, because the work was demanding, which was the way he preferred it. A fence post had shifted in the soft ground near the creek and needed resetting. The mineral blocks in the north section needed replacing. He and Darnell worked through the morning heat without much conversation, the way men who have worked together for years work, with a comfortable wordlessness. Darnell was 57 years old and had been on the Reardon Ranch since Colt's father's time. He was a small, wiry man with a weathered face, and the particular patience of someone who has made a lifetime of getting along with animals, which requires you to understand that most things cannot be forced, and most problems cannot be solved by hurrying. He was also, in his way, deeply perceptive about people, though he expressed this perception almost exclusively through silence and the occasional raised eyebrow. He raised both eyebrows when Colt, for the third time in the same hour, turned and looked back toward the house. She know you're doing that? Darnell said. Colt turned back to the fence post. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't, Darnell said, and handed him the driver without being asked. They said nothing more about it. At noon, Colt came in and washed his hands at the outdoor faucet and dried them on the work towel by the door and went inside. Vera was in the kitchen making sandwiches, and Celeste was sitting at the table with a glass of tea and a paperback novel, and she had pushed her shoes off and had her feet tucked up on the chair the way a person does when they have decided they are comfortable. And there was something about that, about the ease of it, about the particular unself-consciousness of a woman who pushes her shoes off in a borrowed kitchen and does not think twice about it, that he found himself staring at for a half-second before he made himself look away. Sit down, Vera said. I made enough for everyone. He sat. They ate. Vera talked, which was what Vera did. She talked about Dale's conference, and about a neighbor dispute back in Fort Worth, and about a television program she had watched the previous evening that Colt had no knowledge of. Celeste listened and responded with appropriate amounts of interest and occasional laughter. Colt ate and said little, and listened, and found that he was more engaged in the conversation than he usually was, possibly because the conversation contained Celeste. He noticed things during that lunch he had not let himself notice before. The way she held her glass with both hands, the way she smiled slowly, not immediately, as if she were checking the smile against something internal before she let it out. The way she disagreed with Vera about the television program in question, with a quiet directness that was not unkind, but was also not uncertain. She was a woman who knew her own mind. In his experience, which was not inconsiderable, women who knew their own minds had their own complications. His wife, Claire, had known her own mind very well, and what her mind had eventually decided was that life on a working ranch in the Texas Valley was not what she had imagined it to be, and that she had imagined she wanted something different. She had not been wrong to want something different. He had not been wrong to stay. Those two things had simply been incompatible, and after 3 years of trying to fit them together, they had parted without ugliness, but with a finality that had left him with a clear and settled conviction that he was not a man built for partnership. He had held that conviction for 8 years. He was holding it a little less firmly than usual right now, and he noticed that too. After lunch he went back out. He had work in the South Quarter. He spent the afternoon there and did not look back at the house. At dinner, which he arrived for on time rather than late, which was unusual, He found himself asking her about Louisiana. It was a natural question. He had seen it come up in the lunch conversation and had a genuine curiosity about the place she came from, which was different enough from the land he knew that he wanted to understand it. She told him about the part of Louisiana she was from, the flat, wet country near Lafayette, the bayou and the heat, and the way everything grew there with an urgency that the drier climates did not produce. She told him about the food, which was a world entirely different from Texas food, richer and more layered, built on tradition in a way that felt almost like ceremony. She told him about the market in Lafayette she went to every Saturday morning when she was a child with her grandmother, and the way the market smelled, and the things her grandmother bought, and what she made with them. He listened. He ate. He asked questions when she paused. Vera, across the table, had the look of a woman who is watching something she had half hoped for, and is now being careful not to acknowledge in case she frightens it off. He did not stay at the table after dinner. He cleared his plate and thanked Celeste for the conversation and went out to do the final evening check on the cattle, which he always did, and which tonight took him a little longer than it needed to because he walked the long way around the north pasture in the last of the light and thought. He was not a man who thought without a purpose. He did not brood. He did not circle the same ground repeatedly. He turned a thing over until he understood it, and then he made a decision, and that was the end of it. That was his system. The thing he was turning over now was this. He was a man of 43, who had organized his life with great care around the absence of certain complications. He had the ranch. He had his work. He had Darnell and Vera and a handful of relationships with neighboring ranchers that were practical and warm, and required almost nothing from him emotionally. He was not happy exactly, in the full throttle sense of the word. But he was settled. He was functional. He moved through his days with a sense of purpose and a very low level of surprise, and he had come to understand that the low level of surprise was a feature, not a failure. This woman was introducing a level of surprise he had not planned for. He finished the walk. He came back in. The house was mostly quiet. Vera's light on under the door at the end of the hall, and he passed the spare room and saw the light was on there too, the door slightly ajar, and he could see the edge of the desk and the lamp and her hand moving across the page of her notebook. He kept walking. He went to bed. He stared at the ceiling again, which was becoming a pattern. On Friday morning he was in the kitchen first. He had the coffee going by the time she appeared, and he poured her a mug without asking, because he had seen how she took it, which was black with 1/2 spoon of sugar, and he set it at her usual place at the table. She looked at it when she sat down, and then she looked at him, and there was something in her expression that he could not read with any precision, but that made the back of his neck feel warm. "Thank you," she said. "Sure," he said. They sat with their coffee in the morning quiet. The sky outside was doing its slow change from black to dark blue, to the faintest suggestion of gold. The cattle moved in the near pasture with their unhurried morning sounds. The house held them both in its early stillness. "I'd like to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. "That stew you made Wednesday, would you be willing to tell me what was in it?" She looked at him for a moment, with that measuring look. "You want the recipe?" "I want to understand it," he said. "I've been eating in this house for 11 years, and I've never tasted anything like that in it." She held his gaze. She seemed to be deciding something. "It's not about the ingredients," she said. "The ingredients are ordinary. It's about the time you give it." "The time," he repeated. "You can't rush a stew," she said. "Most people do. They add heat when they should be adding patience. The flavor you tasted took 4 hours to build. You can't take a shortcut to 4 hours. 4 hours is 4 hours." He turned his mug in his hands, thinking about that. "That's true of most worthwhile things," he said. He had not meant to say it out loud. He said it and then left it there. She looked at him. Her expression shifted slightly, and in that shift was something he recognized, not because he had seen it recently in anyone's face, but because he knew it from very long ago, the look of a person beginning to consider something they had not previously given themselves permission to consider. She looked down at her coffee. "Yes," she said. I suppose it is. The morning light came through the kitchen window and lay across the table between them, and outside the ranch moved into its daylight hours with all its familiar demands, and neither of them said anything more about it. But the thing was there now in the space between them, quiet and warm and patient, the way all things that take time to build must first wait to be given the time they need. Colt drank his coffee. Celeste wrote in her notebook. The morning went on, and something that had no name yet continued, very slowly, to cook. Vera called Dale on Friday evening, and there was a long conversation in the back sitting room, with the door not entirely closed. And when she came out, she had the look of a woman who has been handed a decision she already wanted to make, and is now simply going to make it, with the appearance of having thought it over. Dale wants me to come up to Amarillo for the weekend, she said, looking between Colt and Celeste in the casual way of someone who has rehearsed the casualness. The conference ends Sunday. He thinks I should be there. Celeste said that made sense. Colt said nothing. I'll drive up in the morning, Vera said. Celeste, if you don't mind staying on through the weekend, we can ride back to Fort Worth together on Sunday. That way you're not traveling alone. I don't mind, Celeste said. Colt still said nothing. He was looking at the window. His expression was the particular expression of a man who is not going to reveal his reaction to a piece of news but who is also, in some part of him he cannot entirely control, relieved. Vera left at 7 the next morning, in a cloud of genuine affection, and what Colt privately suspected was very satisfied self-congratulation. She hugged them both. She told Colt to be good. She told Celeste to enjoy the ranch. She drove away down the long drive in the direction of Amarillo, and the dust settled behind her car, and Colt and Celeste were left standing on the front porch of the ranch house, in the early Saturday light, alone in it for the first time. The first thing Celeste said was, I can take one of the ranch trucks and drive myself if you'd rather I did. He looked at her. Why would I rather you did that? He said. I don't want to be in your way, she said. You have work. I always have work, he said. That doesn't mean you're in the way. She held his gaze for a moment and then nodded once. Then I'll stay. He went to work. She went inside. The morning passed in the rhythm it always passed in, feeding and checking and fixing the small things that came up daily on a working ranch, and had no patience for being set aside. But the rhythm had something different in it today. A kind of awareness underneath the ordinary motion of the work, a knowledge that she was in the house, and that he would come back to the house at noon, and she would be there. He was not a man given to that kind of anticipation. He had not felt it in a very long time. It was disorienting in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. Darnell did not raise his eyebrows that morning. He simply worked alongside Colt with his customary efficiency, and said nothing about anything except the work, which was either courtesy or mercy, and Colt was grateful for it either way. At noon, Colt came in, and she was in the garden. There was no formal garden at the ranch. There was a patch of ground along the south wall of the house, where Colt's mother had grown tomatoes and herbs 30 years ago, and where the soil still held some of that intention, though it had gone mostly to weeds and a few tough volunteer plants that had survived on stubbornness alone. Celeste was crouched down in it, pulling weeds with the methodical patience she seemed to bring to everything she did. He stopped at the garden's edge. You don't have to do that, he said. I know, she said. I want to. She pulled a long-rooted weed free and set it aside. There's lavender in here under all this. Did you know that? He did not know that. He had not looked at that patch of ground in years. It was my mother's, he said. He hadn't meant to say it. She sat back on her heels and looked up at him with an expression that was not pity, exactly, and not curiosity exactly, but something between them, a kind of careful attention. She had good taste, Celeste said. They had lunch on the porch because there was a breeze coming from the south that made the heat bearable. Colt had made sandwiches, which was the extent of his kitchen ambition, and he was briefly self-conscious about this in a way he could not fully explain, as if the simplicity of what he had produced was somehow inadequate in comparison to what she had produced in the same kitchen. He recognized this feeling as absurd. He made it anyway, and brought them out, and she thanked him and ate without any indication that she found anything lacking. They talked about the ranch. She asked real questions, not polite questions. She wanted to know how the cattle operation worked, what determined the size of the herd, how he made decisions about buying and selling. She wanted to know about the land itself, how old the property was, and who had built the original house, and how much it had changed over the generations. He answered her. He found that he had more to say on these subjects than he usually had, because most people did not ask real questions about things they were not immediately involved in, and she was asking real questions with real interest, and that made him want to answer them fully. He told her about his grandfather, who had come to the valley with almost nothing, and had built the first structure on the land himself, and started with 12 head of cattle, and had worked every day of his life, until the land was something his son, and then his grandson, could build a life on. He told her about his father, who had been a harder man than his grandfather in some ways, and a softer man in others, who had taught him the land the way certain fathers teach, not with explanation, but with presence, by taking him out, and letting him watch and understand by watching. She listened without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "There's a lot of love in this place. You can feel it in the land." He hadn't thought about it that way. He thought about it now. "You can feel that?" he said. "When someone has poured themselves into a thing for long enough," she said, "it holds that. The way a pan holds seasoning. It doesn't wash out." He didn't say anything. He looked out at the land that his grandfather had broken from raw ground with his own hands, and he let what she'd said sit with him, the way good things need to sit. In the late afternoon, he drove her out to the river. This was not something he had planned. He had intended to spend the afternoon on the equipment check he had been putting off all week. He went to get the truck, and on his way back through the house she was standing at the window looking out at the distance, with a stillness that stopped him in the hallway, and he said, without planning it, "Do you want to see the river?" She turned from the window. "Yes," she said, like it was the simplest question he could have asked. The Red River was 20 minutes from the ranch by truck, through country that grew wilder as you approached it, the vegetation thickening, and the land dropping down toward the water in a way that always gave Colt the sensation of descending into a different world. He drove the truck along the dirt road that ran beside the fence line, and then turned off onto the track he had been driving since he was old enough to see over the steering wheel. He parked where the bank was wide and flat. They got out. The river moved below them, broad and slow and reddish-brown in the afternoon light, the color that gave it its name. The air here was cooler than on the open plain, heavy with the smell of water and green and mud. She stood at the bank's edge and looked at it for a long time without speaking. "It's big," she said finally. "It's wide in August," he said. "Come spring after a good winter, it runs faster and higher." "Do you come out here often?" "Used to," he said. "Not so much lately." She looked at him. "Why not?" He thought about it. "Nowhere to be, I suppose. You need somewhere to be going or somewhere to be coming back from, for a place to feel worth visiting." He heard himself say it and knew it was true. It was more than he had said about himself in a long time, and he was not entirely sure where it had come from. She did not rush to fill the space after he said it. She let it stand, acknowledged it with a small nod, and turned back to the river, and he was grateful to her for that. Raymond loved water, she said. It was the first time she had said her husband's name to him. He registered that without reacting to it. Was he from Louisiana as well? Born there. Never left, she said. He fished. Every Saturday morning for 30 years. Same spot on the same lake. Same battered tackle box. He said it was the only place he could think straight. "That's what the land is for me," Colt said. "Not a specific spot, just being in it." "They're the same thing," she said. "Different geography." They stood at the river for a while longer. The sun was moving lower and the light on the water was changing, going from silver to something closer to gold, and the shadows of the bank trees stretched long across the surface. A heron picked its way along the far shore, with the concentrated deliberation of a creature that has no concern for anything except the next step. She was standing close enough beside him that he was aware of it, without it requiring any particular decision on either of their parts. The wind moved off the water. He looked at her profile, the line of her jaw, and the gray at her temples catching the gold of the late light. He looked away at the river. "I should tell you something," he said. She waited. "I don't do this well," he said, "talking to people, particularly women. I'm told it's a significant personal failing." "Who told you that?" she said. "My ex-wife," he said, "among others." She was quiet for a moment. "You've been doing it fine with me." "That's the part I can't figure out," he said. She turned to look at him. The measuring look again, the one that felt like it was looking for something specific, and usually finding it. "Maybe you're talking to the wrong kind of people," she said. "Some people require performance. You're not a man who performs." He looked at her. "You picked that up in 5 days," he said. "I cook for 4 hours," she said. "I pay attention." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was close to it, closer than he usually got, and she looked at him with something in her expression that was warm and direct, and not asking for anything. And the river moved below them, and the heron lifted off the far shore and carried itself downstream on slow, wide wings, and the evening came on gold and warm around them. On Sunday she cooked the stew again. He had asked her on Saturday night, with a directness that surprised even him. He had simply said, quietly, without ceremony, that he would be grateful if she made the stew again before she left. She had looked at him for a moment and then said, yes, she could do that. She started it at 2 in the afternoon again. He did his work, but he was aware of the kitchen the whole time, the way you are aware of a fire in a room when you have your back to it, feeling its warmth without looking at it. Darnell, who had been told nothing, and whose powers of observation were therefore operating entirely on their own, took one look at Colt's face when he came in from the south section at 4, and said, "She leaving tomorrow?" "In the morning," Colt said. Darnell wiped his hands on his work rag, said nothing further. They ate the stew at the table again, just the two of them, because it was Sunday, and Darnell had gone home to his own house for the evening. The stew was the same as before, exactly the same depth, the same patience in it, the same thing underneath the surface that he couldn't name and couldn't stop reaching for. He told her it was the same. She looked pleased in a quiet way. "Good," she said. "It should always be the same. That's how you know what you're doing." "Do you always cook the same way?" he said. "I cook the same dishes the same way," she said. "The dish doesn't change. The occasion changes." He thought about that for a moment. "What's the occasion tonight?" She met his eyes. She kept them there. "Saying a proper goodbye," she said, "to a place I wasn't expecting to like as much as I did." He held her gaze. "What did you like about it?" he said. She looked down at her bowl. She turned her spoon over once. She looked back up at him. "The quiet," she said, "and the quality of the company." He didn't look away. "You don't have to say goodbye to the company," he said. "That part isn't fixed." She held his gaze for a long moment. The lamp on the kitchen table made the room warm and small, and the night outside was wide and dark and full of the sounds of the valley. And between them on the table sat the bowl of a stew that had started everything. 4 hours and 4 days and a whole accidental rearrangement of two people's careful lives ago. "No," she said. "I suppose it isn't." Outside, the August night deepened, and the stars came out over the Red River Valley in their thousands, and the ranch held its breath around them, patient and dark, and full of the particular peace of a place that has seen long things happen slowly, and knows how to wait for what comes next. She was gone by 7. Vera arrived back from Amarillo at 6:45, energized and talking from the moment she walked in the door, and Celeste had her bag already by the front entrance, and the two of them moved through the house with the efficient speed of women who have a long drive ahead of them and want to get started before the day's heat builds. Colt carried the bag to the car. He shook Vera's hand and kissed her cheek. He turned to Celeste. She held out her hand. He took it. They shook hands the way they had when she arrived, 7 days ago, before he knew what he was shaking hands with. "Safe travels," he said. "Thank you for having me," she said. "It's a beautiful place." He nodded. She let go of his hand. She got in the car. Vera got in the car. The car went down the drive. He stood on the porch until it turned out onto the highway, and he couldn't see it anymore. He went inside. The house was unchanged. The same walls, the same light, the same worn oak table, the same view of the east pasture through the kitchen window. Nothing had been moved or altered. Everything was exactly as it had always been. And yet the house felt different in a way that was not imaginary, and was not dramatic, but was absolutely present. The way a room feels when a fire has gone out, and the warmth is still in the walls but beginning, slowly, to leave. He poured coffee he didn't finish. He went out to the barn. Darnell was already there, checking the water lines on the south side, and he looked up when Colt came in and said nothing. This was the correct response. Colt appreciated it. He worked through the day with the focused attention of a man who is using work for a specific purpose. It was not distraction exactly. It was more like he was loading himself with the physical world until there was no room left for the thing he didn't want to examine too closely in the daylight. The fence line needed walking in the north section. The hay delivery was coming Wednesday and needed to be planned for. The mineral blocks he'd replaced earlier in the week needed to be documented in the record book. He moved through all of it with his customary precision. In the evening he sat at the kitchen table with the record book and wrote up the week's decisions and numbers. He noted the fence repair. He noted the scheduled delivery. He noted the head count from the weekend check. He wrote it all in his careful, even handwriting. The same handwriting his father had taught him to use, because illegible records are useless records, and useless records cost money. When he was finished, he sat with his pen in his hand and looked at the blank space at the bottom of the page. He was not a man who wrote personal things in the record book. He had kept the record book strictly functional for 11 years. He put the pen down and closed the book. He sat in the kitchen in the quiet of the Sunday evening, and he did not stare at the ceiling this time. He sat at the table and looked at the stove where the pot had been for 2 afternoons in the past week, and he made a decision. Not about her. Not yet. He was not a man who made decisions about people impulsively, but about himself. He decided that he was not going to proceed as if the past week had not happened. That was the one thing he was certain about. He had arranged his life for 11 years around the conviction that he was not built for certain things. And in 5 days a woman he had not expected had walked into his house and quietly, without any intention of doing so, dismantled that conviction from the inside. He was a man who revised his positions when the evidence required it. That was simply good sense. He picked up the phone. He dialed the number she had written on the note card. The note card was on the counter where she had left it, slightly to the left of where she usually stood when she worked at the stove. He had not moved it. He had looked at it several times without picking it up. He picked up the phone now and dialed from the card and sat down at the table while it rang. She picked up on the third ring. "Hello," she said. "It's Colt," he said. A pause of 1 second, warm and not surprised. "I thought you might call," she said. "I said I wasn't built for conversation," he said. "I'm revising that." "I remember," she said. "I'd like to talk," he said. "If you're not busy." "I have nowhere to be," she said. They talked for 2 hours. He had told her he was not built for conversation, and what he discovered over those 2 hours was that he was built for conversation with the right person, that the problem had never been conversation itself, but the way that conversation with most people felt like standing in a field with your arms out trying to catch something that kept going over your head. With her it was different. With her it was like talking across a table where everything landed where it was meant to land. She told him about the drive back from Fort Worth. He told her about the hay delivery planning. These were small and ordinary things. But they were also not small, because they were the particular small things of two people beginning to let each other into the ordinary texture of their lives, which is the beginning of all real things between people. She laughed at something he said around the 90-minute mark. He had not been trying to make her laugh. He had been describing Darnell's opinion of the new mineral block supplier, which Darnell had expressed with characteristic economy, in 2 words that did not reflect well on the supplier's parentage. She laughed. That low, genuine laugh he had heard for the first time in his kitchen 3 days ago. and something in him settled in a way he didn't have a word for. They said goodnight at 10. He put the phone down and sat at the table in the quiet of the ranch house, and was, in some fundamental way, not the same man who had put the phone down 11 years of quiet evenings ago and simply gone to bed. He called again on Tuesday. She picked up on the second ring. He called on Thursday. On Saturday she called him. This went on for 6 weeks. In the 4th week he told her about Claire, his ex-wife. Not at length, not with grievance. Simply the fact of it, the marriage and the years and the ending of it, because he felt she ought to know that part of the ground he was standing on, and because he trusted her with it in a way he had not trusted very many people with the more private facts of his life. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said that she understood, and that she was sorry it had been hard. She did not offer opinions about Claire, or about what it meant, or about what he should make of it. He appreciated that more than he could have explained. In the 5th week, she told him more about Raymond, not the grief of losing him, not the hard part, but the living part, what their marriage had actually been, the small, reliable pleasures of 31 years with a good man who loved water and fished every Saturday morning and came home smelling of it and cooked her breakfast on Sundays because she had cooked every other meal of their lives together, and he thought that was fair. She told him these things with a warmth that was not sadness, and not nostalgia exactly, but something closer to gratitude, the way a person speaks about a good thing they were given and still hold. He listened and understood why she was telling him. He was telling her who he was. She was telling him who she was and what she carried. They were deciding, quietly, whether the thing they were becoming was one that could hold both of those histories without being crushed by them. He drove to Louisiana at the start of the 6th week. There was a bull in Opelousas that a man named Gerald Fitch was selling at a price that Colt had heard about from another rancher, and had thought, in the abstract, might be worth looking into. He went to look at the bull. It was a perfectly good bull, and he was genuinely considering it, and he also stayed in Louisiana for 4 days, which was 2 days longer than looking at a bull requires. He called Celeste from the motel in Opelousas on the first evening. "I'm in Louisiana," he said. A pause. "I know," she said. "Vera told me." "Vera told you." "She thought I should know," she said. Her voice had something in it that was not quite amusement, and not quite nervousness, but was somewhere between the two. "I'd like to see you," he said, "if that's something you'd want." She was quiet for a moment. "Come for dinner tomorrow," she said. "I'll cook." He said yes. He drove to her house the next evening through the flat, wet Louisiana country that was so different from his valley, the air thick and green-smelling, the sky lower and more present than the Texas sky, as if it were leaning down to take a closer look at things. Her house was on a quiet street, in a neighborhood of houses that had been there long enough to look like they belonged to the ground they sat on. There was a porch with 2 chairs. There were flowers in the yard, well tended and established. He knocked. She opened the door. She was wearing a blue dress, and no particular expression on her face. Just the calm, open look he had come to understand was her resting face, the face of a woman who had decided to see what the world brought her without bracing against it. She looked at him the way she had looked at him the first morning in his kitchen, as if she were deciding something carefully. "Come in," she said. He went in. Her house smelled like her kitchen. It smelled like something on the stove. He stood in the front room and looked around at her space, and understood, in the way you understand the shape of a person's inner life from the way they arrange their outer one, a great deal about who she was. Photographs on the walls, family and places, and one of a man he didn't need to be told was Raymond, young and laughing on a dock with a fishing rod. Books on the shelves that were clearly read, spines broken, pages turned back. Plants in the windows, alive and green and clearly cared for. "Your home," he said. "My home," she agreed. "Sit down." He sat. She brought him tea because she knew he didn't drink, which was a small thing to know, and also not a small thing. And they sat in her living room while the pot worked in the kitchen, and she asked him about the bull, and he told her honestly that it was a good animal, and he was probably going to buy it. She laughed. You drove to Louisiana for a bull. The bull was already here, he said. I made it convenient. She looked at him, the measuring look and then the slow smile, the one that checked itself before it came out, and he felt something in his chest move the way it had moved the first night at the counter with the empty bowl, that deep stirring of something he couldn't name but felt all the way down. She cooked the stew. Not the bean and ham stew, a different one. A Louisiana stew, dark and rich and layered with a complexity that was different from the first but had the same quality in it, the same evidence of time given and attention paid, the same patience running through it like a thread. He ate at her kitchen table. She sat across from him. They ate by the light of the lamp over the table, and outside the Louisiana evening was deep and warm and full of sounds that were different from his sounds, more insistent, more layered, and he let them settle around him the way you let a new place settle when you are open to it. This is different, he said about the stew. Different place, different stew, she said. Better or worse, he said. Different, she said. That's not the same as better or worse. He thought about that. He thought about the word different, and what it could mean. How the land here was different from his land. How the quiet was different. How the air was different. How she was different from anyone he had known in a long time. How, in the particular arithmetic of his life, different had always registered as difficult, something to navigate around rather than toward. He was navigating toward it. He came back to Louisiana 3 more times over the following months. She came to the ranch twice, and the second time, she walked directly to the garden along the south wall and finished pulling the weeds she had started in August, and she found the lavender underneath, and she planted 2 more things she had brought from her own garden in a pot in the truck that she had planned the whole drive without telling him. And when she showed him the pots, he looked at her for a long moment and said nothing, which was the way he expressed the things that went too deep for words. They did not rush anything. Neither of them was built for rushing. The winter was long, and the phone calls were constant, and the months moved the way months move, when you have something good growing in them, with a satisfying density, each day holding more than it used to. In February, he drove to Louisiana and stayed a week, and at the end of the week he sat with her on her porch in the February cool and said, without preamble, that he thought she should marry him. She held her cup of tea in both hands and looked at him. You think I should? She said. I think we should, he corrected. She was quiet for a time that was not long, but felt long, because it was weighted with everything the 2 of them had put into the months since August. I want to keep my house, she said. All right, he said. And I want to come to the ranch, she said. Not because you need me to, but because I want to. That's what I want too, he said. She looked at him with those dark, calm eyes that had been measuring him since the first day in his hallway, and had, evidently, been finding him acceptable. Yes, she said. He reached over and put his hand over hers on the cup. He held it. She turned her hand so that her fingers were through his. They sat like that on the porch in the February cold, while the neighborhood moved around them in its ordinary Sunday morning way. They married in the spring. Small ceremony, as both of them wanted. A judge Celeste knew. Vera, who wept without apology. Darnell, who wore a tie Colt had never seen before, and shook Celeste's hand with both of his, and said she'd done well, which everyone understood was directed at Colt. They went back to the ranch. She brought her plants, she brought her pots and a particular cast-iron pan she had been cooking in for 20 years, and a small framed photograph of Raymond that she put on the shelf in the bedroom, and that Colt looked at once, the first evening, and left alone. She brought her notebook and her pens and her 2 chairs from the porch in Louisiana, which she put on the ranch porch alongside the existing chairs, so there were 4 now, which was more than they needed and exactly right. She cooked in his kitchen. She made the garden grow back. She learned the cattle's names and their habits, and which fence lines were reliable, and which ones needed watching. He learned her rhythms. He learned that she needed an hour in the morning with her notebook before she wanted to talk to anyone, and he gave her that hour, and used it himself to do the first check on the herd. He learned that she cooked when she was processing something difficult, and that the best thing he could do on those days was come in when the pot was on, and sit at the table, and say nothing, and simply be there. He learned that her laugh, the low, genuine one that had reached into him that first night, was the most reliable thing in his life, and that he had developed the quiet, private project of doing the thing that would produce it as often as he reasonably could. She made the stew every month, always the same, always 4 hours, always from the same proportions, always with the same result. He always ate it at the table. He always had 2 bowls. She always told him it was just a simple stew when he said it was the best thing he had ever eaten. He always said it was not. They both knew they weren't entirely talking about the stew. They knew they never had been. The kitchen where she made it looked out over the east pasture, and in the evenings the light came through the window the way it always had in this house, slow and wide and golden, and the valley stretched out beyond the glass, the same valley his grandfather had broken from nothing, the same land his father had taught him to read without using words, the same house that had been quiet for 11 years and was now, definitively and permanently, quiet no more. On the morning of their first anniversary, Colt woke before 5, as he always did, and dressed in the dark, as he always did, and went to the kitchen to make the coffee, as he always did. And she was already there, sitting at the table with her cup and her notebook, writing a letter she would not send, as she always did. He poured his coffee. He set her mug at her place. He sat across from her. The sun came up over the valley. The cattle moved in the pasture. The lavender along the south wall was blooming for the first time in 30 years. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to.